Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may find yourself in the world today. It is such a joy to be with you. Thank you so very much. Courtney and the leadership of Presbyterians for Earth Care, I'm very grateful for this invitation. Please excuse this background. I'm in a hotel room in Iquitos, Peru, in the heart of the Amazon basin. And I'll share a little bit more about that later on and why that is relevant. But for now, just let it be known that's why I'm not with you in person. But I'm so grateful for this opportunity to be able to share in this way. So the water crisis in Peru is massive, and it is complicated. There are many aspects to what the water crisis is in Peru. And so today, with the time given and with my level of expertise, which is I am not an expert in water per se, I wanted to paint some broad strokes. And so I think to begin to understand what the crisis is about, it's important to understand where water comes from in the first place. And what I mean by that is what does the cycle of water look like in Peru? In Peru, they talk about where water is born. But it's important to see that entire cycle. So we'll briefly kind of look at that cycle because that's important to understand in order to understand what are the different components that are interrupting that cycle or breaking down that cycle. And that is what begins to shape this crisis of water today. And then, of course, is the question how we might respond as people from the U.S., as human beings at large, but in particular as people of the church, because I do think we have a unique response to the crisis of water. And so it's important for us to look at that. So where does water come from? Where is water born in Peru? So this is a map of Peru. On the left, of course, being the Pacific Ocean. On the right would be the Amazon. And that green, the green and dark brown or dark purple space that are running down the middle, kind of parallel to the coast of Peru, that would be the Andes Mountains. And the Andes Mountains are, of course, the headwaters. And that is where people in Peru will say that's where water is born. And so that is really, really important. So water, it's also effectively the continental divide. So when water flows to the left or to the west, it's going down to the desert coast and down to Lima, where the vast, vast majority of the population live, and yet it's a desert. And then on the right side or the east, that is the Amazon. And so the Amazon River really begins in Peru. It begins with the headwaters and the Andes Mountains of Peru. And so that is really would be the beginning of the Amazon basin or the Amazon watershed. So taking a cross section of that map, looking on the right side here, the Pacific Ocean, that desert coast, you see the little buildings with Lima representing Lima. And then you have the Andes Mountains, kind of two major kind of lines of mountains there. And then on the right are would go down into the jungle. And so it's when the rains, the weather systems stop basically on top of the Andes Mountains, it snows at the top. These are mountains that are way above 5,000 meters. We're talking over 22,000 feet above sea level. And so there are glaciers there year round. 70% of the world's tropical glaciers, that is glaciers found between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, 70% of them are in Peru. And they are the source of water for people in Lima, but they are also the source of water for the Amazon basin, although we'll look a little more deeply at that. So water, starts there on those mountaintop, those snow caps, those glaciers, which are always kind of filtering down, water's dripping down in beneath, under the soil and creating the aquifers. And it's necessary that they're frozen to be able to have that continual dripping down of water through the soil throughout the year. But that's not the whole story. So where does water come from? yes, people will say it's born on those mountain, those snow caps, but we have to look a little more deeply where those, a little more closely where those weather systems come from that create the rain or the snow on top of those mountains. And it begins, of course, over on the Atlantic Ocean on the other side of the continent, of course, on the other side of Brazil. And the water evaporates, creates some condensation or clouds in the air, and they begin to move onshore, moving west. But that's not the only water that's coming up. It's also coming from the trees itself, transpiration. And so there's this constant rising up of water, creating clouds. And these are these clouds that kind of flow across the Amazon jungle. They're referred to as floating rivers or flying rivers. So you've got, on the one hand, you've got rivers that are formed from the rains and the snows on the top of the Andes Mountains that flow down the mountain, flow east down into the jungle. So they're flowing east all the way out into the Atlantic Ocean. And then you've got these cloud systems forming from evaporation and transpiration that are moving west. So you've got this circle of water that's constantly going over the Amazon. And it's those moving west, they run into the Andes Mountains and they drop the rain. They can't get past the Andes. And that's why on the other side of the Andes, where Lima is, it's a desert. So it's that cycle of water that's really important. So it depends on those snow caps. It depends on that river flow to the east. It depends on the trees as well, because without those trees, without their transpiration, there's not enough condensation formed to be able to create all the rain that's necessary for the water. So as we'll say here, without trees, there's no rivers. Without rivers, there's no trees. In here, we can see the entire the Amazon basin, which accounts for 20% of the planet's fresh water. And it begins with the Andes Mountains. So that's really important to know. Without the Andes, there's no Amazon. And so what is the crisis then? Well, one immediate crisis is those snow caps on top of the Andes Mountains. They are melting. And here's a picture, you can see on the left side from 1986 to 2016, a 30-year period. You can see pictures taken of the same glacier at the same time of the year and just how much it has disappeared in that 30-year period. It has been estimated that by 2030, all the glaciers that are below the 5,000 meter mark will have melted in Peru, that has disappeared. That generates a massive problem because you don't have that continuous percolating, that filtering of water dripping down and sustaining the aquifers that create the rivers that allow for a continual flow of water throughout the year. And it also leaves way for, instead of snow falling and you get these you get rains that are falling, they just kind of wash down the hill. So and create all sorts of problems. You can have too much rain at one period of time or no rain at another period of time, and that rain is not staying in the soil. So that is a major issue, is the melting of those snow caps, which of course is contributed to climate change. And on the right side is another issue which is of utmost importance, and it's the contamination of the waters. So there's less water, but the water that's left is increasingly contaminated, particularly from extractive industries. And we're going to go into that a little more deeply here in a minute. But what we know is that of Peru's population of 34 million people, about half have access to safe drinking water. So let's go a little deeper into what this crisis is about, beyond the melting snow caps. And I think to set it up, let's hear from the source themselves of how the crisis is generated here. This is a short video clip of Ángel Manero, the Peruvian Minister of Agrarian Development, and he spoke these words not long ago, just a few weeks ago on September 25th. Let's listen to what he had to say. And I hope he's going to speak in Spanish, but there are English subtitles, which I hope you can read.
Si tenemos que elegir en momentos de urgencia, en momentos de escasez, entre darle agua a la agricultura o darle agua a la minería, tenemos que darle agua a la minería, porque es la actividad que más flujo de caja le da al país. Y con ese flujo de caja más bien podemos construir la infraestructura para darle agua a la agricultura en el mediano plazo. La agricultura puede esperar, pero un proyecto minero no espera. Entonces, allí sí el Ministerio ha tenido un cambio de lógica importante, un cambio de pensamiento importante. Estamos apoyando todos los proyectos mineros que nos llegan y eso es, como lo decía, algo importante.
I find it fascinating that one can speak just so openly about what their strategy, if you want to call it that, is, but clearly an economic model here that favors mining over agriculture, or over, and like when we talk about agriculture, we're not necessarily talking about even industrial agriculture. We're talking about family agriculture in those Andes Mountains, which is often small, community level, family oriented agriculture. So he's saying, instead of giving water to the people, we're going to give water to mining. The only thing I would disagree with, I disagree with all he says, but he wants to claim this is a change in logic. And I would say this is far from a change, that this is the way it has been for many, many, many years. So let's take a closer look at what that means. So on the upper left is that same map again of the headwaters of Peru. Those green and dark purple areas, that's the Andes Mountains. That's where they say water is born. That's the top, those are the headwaters. The next map in mining concessions. So area that has been, whose rights have been given to mining companies in particular, and to mine, to explore, do mining exploration. So I believe it's something over 16, maybe close to 17% of the territory of Peru has been concessioned for mining exploration. And you can see where that mining exploration is taking place and mining activity is taking place. The next map to the right of that are environmental liabilities. These are ones that are acknowledged by the state, by the way. So this is not representative of all environmental liabilities for mining. So those dark blue areas, those dots, are environmental liabilities from mining activity. Then the bottom left is areas of poverty, where the highest levels of poverty are in Peru. And again, in the Andes Mountains, these are indigenous communities, campesino communities who rely on the land. They till the land and they care for that land, and they live in poverty. And that is, again, that's where the headwaters are. They are the primary caretakers of those headwaters. And that's where mining is happening, and that's where environmental liabilities are happening. And at that last map on the bottom right, that's where social conflicts are happening. In Peru, at this time, there are roughly a little over 200 so-called social conflicts recognized. A conflict between a community and the state, or a community and a company, typically. Over half of those are mining-related conflicts. But the issue is not just mining. We also have here in Peru oil. Here's a map of oil lots that have been concessioned for oil activity. So you've got them both on the coast, on the west side of the Andes Mountains, on the desert coast and going into the ocean, and then on the eastern side into the Amazon. I've heard at some point that half of the Amazon has been concessioned for mining activity. I don't have that exact figure, but it's a tremendous amount of the Amazon, the Peruvian Amazon, has been concessioned for oil exploration. And we know that between 2000 and 2019, roughly a 20-year period of time, there were 474 oil spills recognized or registered in the Peruvian Amazon. There were more than that, but they weren't all registered. So there's a constant, and this is an increasing rate as well. And so it's estimated there could be far more oil spills in the years to come. And then there's deforestation. And there are many sources for roots behind the deforestation, different legal and illegal activities. An important note here is a law passed by Peru earlier this year, a forestry law, which effectively, and it's really being termed the anti-forestry law because it's effectively paving the way for foreign investors to come and raise the Amazon jungle. But we know between 85 and 2025, a 40-year period of time, this is talking about the entire Amazon, that close to 90 million hectares of forest were basically lost. A space equivalent to the size of Venezuela. And so the underlying cause of the crisis here in Peru, if we could name it simply in a one kind of term, it would be the colonial legacy of extractivism. Going back over 500 years, this has been the model in place for quote unquote economic development. As King Ferdinand said, get gold to his conquistadores who first came here to Peru in 1532, get gold humanely if possible, but at all costs, get gold. And so when the Spanish left, some 300 years later, that doesn't mean that mentality left. That mentality was firmly planted here, and it just changed hands in terms of who was controlling that. Things did not return to a pre-extractive model of economic growth. They've continued to this very day. And so when we talk about that area of colonialism, it's defined by extractivism. The conquistadores came here because they wanted gold. They wanted resources from the earth. So they stole the land, they exploited the land, and they dominated the people on the land through creating racial hierarchies and through a spiritual oppression, really trying to eradicate the indigenous cosmovision, one of living in harmony with the earth. And all of that undergirded by the church's doctrines of discovery, which through biblical texts tried to justify and even mandate this conquering of the Americas. So it comes back to us, how then do we respond? So I'm in Iquitos, Peru right now, attending the Cumbre Amazónica del Agua, the Amazonic Water Summit, the first of its kind, hosted by the network of Catholic churches in the Pan-Amazonic region. So all of the Amazonic countries, representatives of the church and indigenous communities throughout the Amazon. I was very grateful to represent the Presbyterian Church and be one of the very, very few Protestants in that space. But we are opening that door to more ecumenical and interreligious dialogue. But this was a fascinating space to be a part of. And I would like to say what the response that came from that place is a response that I think we can take to heart. And I would frame it simply in this way, how we might respond through a framework of repair, resist, and re-encounter. At the heart of our response is simply undoing what started 500 years ago. Undoing the theft of land, undoing the exploitation of land, undoing the domination of the peoples on that land. This means repairing our harms of the past with indigenous peoples. This includes, but is not limited to, returning land to indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples know better than anyone how to care for this land. It is essential that we return land, that land is under the management of indigenous peoples. For millennia, they were living in harmony with the land. And it only took a few years, really, decades at most, for European conquerors to really begin to contaminate the waters of the land. So we need to repair. That means for us, this goes beyond the Amazon. This is a global initiative of repairing harms of the past, particularly right where you live in your own geography. We need to seriously contemplate at a deeper level what it means to return land, among many other acts of repair. And then we need to resist the ongoing threats from the extractive industries. We talk about extractivism. That includes extractive industries. Extractivism is the entire logic of trying to develop an economy through the exploitation of the land, destruction of the land to generate wealth, so that people can then consume more and more. Extractive industries are, the kind of frontline actors or drivers of extractivism: mining, oil, deforestation, mass agricultural that really extracts water. So indigenous peoples in particular and their lands are a constant threat from extractive industries. And so how do we stand with, alongside, or in support of resourcing, amplifying the voices of indigenous peoples as they face the continuous ongoing threats? Because indigenous peoples in particular, their lives are a threat, not only from the contamination, but from their activism. The criminalization of indigenous peoples, particularly in Latin America and places like Peru, is extreme. And so how do we protect as well the defenders of the land and water? And then we need to consider a re-encounter with indigenous peoples, a re-encounter with their spiritualities and cosmovisions as they invite us into, with curiosity and an openness to learn and ultimately to be transformed. This at its heart, I believe, the water crisis is a spiritual issue. And it is incumbent upon us, the church, to evaluate our own spiritualities. And we need to be in conversation with indigenous peoples and begin to understand their cosmovision, their own spirituality, so that we might be transformed. Well, I'm going to end there. I've said a lot. Thank you again so very much. I'm so very grateful to be here with you. And I look forward to ways we can continue to connect, be in conversation, collaboration. My email address is there, and you know how to reach me. Thank you so much. God bless you.